Hello and welcome back to the Understanding Champions series. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Ezreal, the Prodigal Explorer. Now, Ezreal is a marksman, typically played in the bottom lane, although sometimes he is seen in the jungle or mid lane in past metas, but he has not been seen in any of those roles for about a year and a half or so. So Ezreal's a very popular champion. What he is a spells-based marksman, meaning that he does, unlike traditional marksmen, his main thing isn't to auto attack. He deals a lot of damage through the use of his Qs and his abilities. So we're going to get into his kit, and then we're going to talk about what his kit does, why it's good, and some setups for him. So his kit is relatively basic, but that's what makes him so strong and so malleable. You see him almost all the time. He's almost never completely out of the meta if you are good at him, just because his kit is so innately powerful. So his passive, Rising Spell Force, is every time he hits an ability, he gets 10% bonus attack speed for 6 seconds, stacking up 5 times, so he can get 50% attack speed basically for free just by hitting his spells over and over and over. This helps you take towers quicker, this helps you kill people quicker. It's a pretty good passive. Now, this is his Mystic Shot. His Q is his bread and butter. This is what makes Ezreal Ezreal. It's just a line damage skill shot that applies on hit effects and does some damage. This is, and whenever you hit it, his other cooldowns are refined by 1.5. Now, what is unique to kind of this champion compared to other champions with a similar effect where they hit an ability and reduces cooldown, this is all your abilities, so this includes your ultimate. So if you keep hitting Qs, you can just keep putting out more and more pressure, more Qs, and you get more ults and more other abilities. It's great. His E Excellence Flux is it's a skill shot as well. It throws out a little orb, and whenever you proc it with an ability or by auto attacking it, deals magic damage, and if you pop it with an ability, it gives you mana back. So Ezreal being a mana hungry champion, it is relatively important that you pop this with ability when possible. If we look at his E, Arcane Shift, it's basically just a flash that deals homing magic damage to the nearest enemy. And an important bit here is that it will prioritize any enemy that has Essence Flux on it. So any enemy that has your W already on it, if you E, it'll home to him even if, as long as he's in range, even if there's something else that's maybe closer that it would normally hit. And his ultimate is just another big line skill shot that deals tons of magic damage. That's it. And minions and monsters take 50% reduced damage from it. But it does full damage to everything it passes through, which is kind of unique as well for this ability. So if you look at his abilities as a whole, you can see they're very short compared to most modern champions. He basically has skill shot that you have to hit after you land it, flash, skill shot, and some attack speed. So he is a very kind of cookie cutter champion, but that is, again, what makes him powerful. So he can deal a lot of damage through his Qs, just sitting back, poking, and he is really safe with his Arcane Shift. This is the trade-off for Ezreal versus other traditional marksmen, is you trade a lot of your upfront damage, burst power, for the ability to stay super safe with your E. So typically you pick him into meta or into games where there's lots of skill shots you can dodge, and he is, as you see here, since he does do damage through these abilities and stuff, he's not necessarily going to be super good at destroying tanks. So you generally want to pick him into squishier teams that have lots of skill shots that you need to dodge. If you absolutely need to be safe and put out damage, Ezreal is the go-to. And despite what most people think, Ezreal is a hyper carry. It just takes a while for you to actually do all the damage. So he isn't a hyper carry in the way Kog'Maw is, but especially in the professional scenes and higher elos, there are comps that are literally for utility characters in Ezreal, because he is just so safe, and if you let him do his damage, he will kill people. So he also has some quote-unquote assassination potential in his kit with his Essence Flux. If you hit this on someone from a bush and then like auto QE them or whatever, or if you hit your true shot, shift Q, you can 100-0 the enemy AD carry, so there is some potential for burst coming out of Ezreal, and that can often catch people off guard, and this is something you learn as you play this champion more and more. Bad Ezreals will sit back in lane and just hit Qs to farm and will not pressure, but good ones will often use their Essence Flux and Arcane Shift aggressively once they know that the enemy is not in a position where they can punish. So despite what most people would have you believe and what most Ezreal players show, his laning phase is not nearly as atrocious as most people believe it is. He can bully, he can push people out. You just have to be careful of powerful clerics because his damage is over time. It is not consistent. So something like Nami, Yumi, Soraka, they're going to be a little bit more annoying for him to harass and poke out of the lane. And also he is mana hungry, so you need to be careful, especially before first back, about consuming too much mana. So yeah, that's about it for the kit and kind of the situations where he is seen. So let's get into his runes and build, and we'll talk a little bit about why he builds the way he builds, what kind of what kind of versatility he has. So for runes, commonly seen as Klepto, this is because even though his lane phase is not terrible, he is a weaker laner, meaning that he is less likely to get kills, and so you want to generate gold through another source, and Klepto is a great way to do that, especially since his Q will proc the first proc of it if nothing else, and he can spam his abilities relatively easily. And then after that, you just want to get either boots or stopwatch. You can get stopwatch against stuff like maybe Pike or Nautilus, where you need to stopwatch the ult once to not die, but boots is generally seen as the standard option just because it's free money, and that's good. Biscuits, because he is mana hungry, so even if you aren't necessarily using them for the HP, which they're still good for in harder lanes, just getting the mana back is important for him. And Cosmic Insight just for a little bit of CDR, which being a heavily ability-based champion, CDR is important to his kit. And then for your secondary, you almost always go Mana Flow Band, because like I said earlier, he is mana hungry, so having that extra mana sustain is great for Ezreal. And then after that, you're going to go Transcendence or Gathering Storm. Transcendence is more of a, you kind of have to know what you're, or not have to know, but you kind of want to know what you're building beforehand, so you're not necessarily overstacking it too much, because a lot of times if you're going to be stacking a lot of items, that it's very hard to get as much value out of it as Gathering Storm. But if you need your power spike earlier, having the 10% CDR means that you can be a lot more powerful around the 2-item power spike, which is around where Ezreal is his strongest, is around 2-3 items, kind of going into 4. It's when you want to be winning and closing out the game on Ezreal, because he does fall off, and not being not having as much consistent and burst DPS as traditional marksmen do in the later game. So the core of his build is Mana Immune, because he is super mana hungry, so Tear is fantastic for him, and his Mystic Shot does proc the passive on Mana Immune, so great for him. And then a Sheen item, typically either Triforce or Iceborne. Iceborne is more of the standard one that you see nowadays, but Triforce is still good. Obviously Iceborne versus things that you need to slow down and kite, and versus teams that maybe have assassins where the armor is useful, and Triforce when you just need the extra damage. Another thing is that Iceborne is cheaper, so if you need a powerful item after that, maybe, or if you're going to be building rather expensive, then sometimes you just get the Iceborne anyway. But typically, the way Ezreal wants to get his first 2 backs is he wants to get Tear or Sheen his first back. Sheen is for if you can if you think you can aggressively push lane and get advantages, Tyr is the more common back just to keep things going. And then the next one, you'll generally get Sheen after Tyr. And normally he finishes his Sheen item before he finishes his Tyr item, because you need time to stack the Tyr anyway, so it's better to get the more value out of Triforce or Iceborne. But especially if you build Iceborne first, this means that you will not have tons of damage, so a lot of times supports or junglers will be surprised at how little damage you do, so you got to be careful and not bait your team into fights that you can't win because you haven't built, finished, and stacked your mana mune yet. And then Ezreal has kind of two main paths that he breaks off into after his core items. An ADE path with Bork and a Last Whisper / utility item, and then another utility item. Bork is good for him because the slow on the active means that he can easily hit his skill shots. It's also good for him because Bork triggers off his mystic shots, so you can get the little bit extra damage. It also does help him shred tanks a little bit, gives him a little bit of attack speed, helps him take Baron quicker. So it's just a good item, and the healing is really good. And then a Last Whisper item is generally the fourth, just because it gives him more damage on his mystic shots. It's the most gold efficient to damage item you can get. You can replace this with whatever you need, and then obviously get whatever you want for your last item. Good options are GA, Mob Malmortius, Guardian Angel, or we would say Guardian Angel, Mercurial maybe even possibly. Sometimes you'll see Bloodthirster when you just need raw AD. Maybe they have no armor whatsoever, and you just want raw AD to smack people and more healing in fights. Then Bloodthirster is also an option. Something people sometimes do that's a little iffy is you can pick up a lethality item, like the Dustblade, to hit from corners and edges where you're out of vision for the increased damage. I wouldn't recommend it personally. I don't do it that often whenever I play Ezreal, but it is something to note that is an option. Then the AP path has you getting Gunblade instead of Bork, because obviously, you want the AP damage, and Gunblade gives you a lot more healing than Bork does through your AoEs, which is, when you're building AP, you're mainly looking to burst people with Essence Flux and melt teams with your True Shot Barrage. So then after your Gunblade, typically you go Ludens. Ludens is nice because it gives you tons of CDR. It gives you a little bit of mana for your mana mune to give you a little bit extra AD. And the passive is actually pretty good. The little pop or little spread effect is actually pretty good for just adding extra damage to your Qs. The build path is nice, and he does have some good AP scaling in his kit, which is why this is an option. You could alternatively try other AP items, although I don't recommend them as much. You could go for something like a Zhonya's if you really need it. You could try a Death Gap. People have tried this in the past, and it's not necessarily too bad because of the high AP scaling in some of his kit, but generally Ludens is better because it offers the CDR that he wants, and the passive, or the passive effect adds damage to his Qs. So, as well, when you're building, the AP path is generally more common to go for the what's it called, the Lost Chapter item before finishing out Gunblade. Generally, you'll get maybe the Vamp Scepter and the Lost Chapter item for the CDR, the mana, and the mana regen on level up. For boots for Ezreal, you have a few options. Lucidity is the standard option for the CDR, which is good. You generally don't want to do that on the AP path unless you've already taken Transcendence, because you'll overstack. He also has the ability to go defensive boots. You can go Mercs if you need him. You can go Tabbies if you need him. On the AP path specifically, you can go into Sork Pen boots to burst harder with your Essence Flux and with your True Shot broad across groups. And I wouldn't really recommend other boots. Swifties, Mobies aren't very good. Neither are Berserker Raves. So that's Ezreal in a nutshell. All in all, he is a fantastic AD carry. If you are well practiced on him and know how to use him and know how to push an advantage hard in the mid game and win with him. I want to thank you for watching and look forward to more of these videos.